The sector was quiet. Ships from various alien races moved through space, their engines humming softly in the vast emptiness. It was the usual peaceful routine. No one expected any trouble today. For weeks, there had been no major events, and the sector had been calm. The space stations in orbit around the nearby planets were busy with routine tasks. Traders moved in and out of docking bays, and fleets performed their normal patrols. Everyone thought it was just another ordinary day. But then, everything changed. The first sign was the alert. It came in the form of a cold, robotic voice that echoed through the sector. A message was broadcast on every channel. Warning: unknown vessel detected. Large mass and high energy readings. Location: near the outer rim. At first, no one knew what to think. Ships frequently passed through the outer rim, sometimes running low on fuel or needing to avoid pirate ships. It wasn't unusual to see ships out there. But this wasn't just any ship. The warning message had a sense of urgency that made everyone pause. The space station commanders checked their screens, trying to get a clear image of the new arrival. But the ship didn't show up on their scans. It was like it wasn't there at all. A few minutes later, the scans began to return something strange. The mass readings were off the charts. The vessel was massive, far larger than any ship any of the local races had ever seen before. But there was something even more unsettling. The energy signature was wrong. It wasn't like anything in the galaxy. The fleet commanders scrambled to get more data. "What is it?" one of them muttered, tapping his console with growing frustration. The ship had no name, no identification, nothing, just a shadow in the deep darkness of space. Then, without warning, the ship came into full view. It wasn't like any ship they had ever seen. It was a warship. The sleek, sharp edges of its black hull seemed to absorb the light around it. Massive engines, glowing with an eerie red light, sat at the rear. Its design was unlike any known civilization in the sector. The structure of the ship was more angular and intimidating than anything the aliens had ever encountered. It was a ship built for war, and it seemed to radiate an aura of power. Where did it come from? Someone gasped, but no one had an answer. The ship was simply there. And it wasn't just a ship, it was a human warship. The news spread like wildfire across the sector. Everyone had heard of humans. The stories about their strength, their power, and their brutal ways of fighting were famous. The humans had a reputation. An unpredictable, savage species with warships that could destroy entire fleets. But no one had seen them in action for decades. Some had thought they had disappeared long ago, leaving only whispers and old legends behind. But here it was in front of them, this warship from humanity. The messages began flooding in from every corner of the sector. The military leaders, the political heads, the scientists, and even the traders all demanded answers. Some thought it was a mistake. Some thought it was a threat. And some just didn't know what to think. But one thing was certain. The humans were back. As the warship silently drifted through the sector, not a single shot was fired. No sign of aggression. No message. Just silence. And that silence was more terrifying than any weapon could ever be. The alien fleets gathered around the ship, keeping a respectful distance. They had never seen anything like it, but they didn't know what to do. Should they prepare for battle? Should they try to make contact? Or should they just wait and see what the humans wanted? On one of the closest space stations, the commander stood at his console, eyes locked on the screen. He could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut through. "What do we do now?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His crew waited for orders. The sensors were still trying to analyze the warship, but nothing was working. The ship's shields seemed to block any kind of scan, making it impossible to understand its capabilities. All they knew was that this warship had come from the humans, and that meant it could do things that no other species in the galaxy could. Across the sector, similar scenes were playing out. Every station and fleet was on high alert. The warship had arrived, and no one knew why. The silence stretched on for what seemed like hours. The warship was not moving closer to any planet. It wasn't attacking. It wasn't even broadcasting any signals. It simply remained there, hovering in the cold void of space. The stillness was unnerving. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. "Why haven't they contacted us?" one of the commanders asked, his voice shaking with nervous energy. "What are they waiting for?" Another officer looked at the monitor. The human warship hadn't moved a single inch. It remained in the same place it had been for hours. Its weapon systems were silent, its engines dormant, but the ship itself was a constant, threatening presence. Then, just as everyone was beginning to wonder if the warship would ever move again, a transmission crackled through the airways. "Attention!" a voice boomed. It was a human voice. "This is the human warship reclaimer. You are all advised to stand down. We come in peace, but we will not hesitate to defend ourselves if threatened." The message was short, to the point. There was no room for misunderstanding. The humans were not here for negotiation or friendship. They had made their presence known, and now it was up to the rest of the galaxy to decide how to respond. The room fell silent. The sector was holding its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting for the next move. But the silence was unbearable. The tension was rising. The human warship reclaimer had arrived, and the galaxy was about to find out what that really meant. Hours passed after the chilling message was broadcast. The tension in the sector grew thicker with each moment. Every fleet, every station, every alien in the area was on edge. The human warship reclaimer was still hovering in space, silent, its presence like a heavy weight pressing down on the galaxy. No one knew exactly what the humans were planning, but everyone was prepared for the worst. Across the sector, leaders convened in emergency meetings. Diplomats argued over the best course of action. Military commanders called for readiness, preparing their fleets for any possible attack. But no one had a clear plan. The humans were an unknown force. Their history was filled with stories of fear and strength. Yet, no one had encountered them face to face in centuries. What would they do now? At the heart of the sector, the central command station buzzed with activity. General Calmer, a seasoned alien officer who had seen countless battles, stood before a holographic display. His eyes were locked onto the image of the reclaimer, which was still showing no signs of aggression. His fingers tapped nervously on the console. "We need to know more," he muttered, his voice low. "We cannot act without understanding their intentions." His second-in-command, Lieutenant Vera, glanced at him with concern. "But sir, we've been waiting for hours. What if they attack us without warning?" General Kalmar sighed, rubbing his temples. "We cannot assume anything. We need a peaceful resolution, but we must also be ready if they decide otherwise." Just then, a transmission came through. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it. "This is the human warship reclaimer. We demand answers. Why are your fleets gathering? What are you planning?" The alien officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was the moment. The humans were speaking directly to them. It was clear that the reclaimer was no ordinary ship. It was a warship, and the humans were not afraid to show their power. General Kalmar cleared his throat and stepped forward. "We are not your enemies," he said, his voice steady but filled with caution. "We seek to understand your intentions. The sector is peaceful, and we would like to keep it that way." The silence that followed was unbearable. The reclaimer did not respond immediately. Instead, the holographic image of the warship remained motionless, its dark silhouette floating in the cold expanse of space. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. The crew aboard the central command station held their breath, waiting for the next move. Then, a voice crackled over the comms once more. "Your peace is irrelevant," the human voice said, colder than before. "We are here for a reason, and you will know soon enough. Stand by." The transmission ended abruptly. "Stand by," Lieutenant Vera whispered, her face pale. What does that mean? General Kalmar turned to her, his expression hardening. It means we prepare for anything. We can't wait any longer. Get the fleet in position. If they are here for peace, then we'll be ready. But if they're not, we won't be caught off guard. Elsewhere, across the sector, similar scenes were unfolding. Alien leaders were making the same decisions, racing to prepare for the unknown. No one could deny the threat that the human warship posed. It wasn't just the ship's size or weaponry that made it dangerous. It was the uncertainty. The humans had arrived, but no one knew what they wanted. No one knew how they would act. Meanwhile, the Reclaimer remained still. Its crew had already been briefed on the situation. They knew the importance of this moment. They had waited for this for years, preparing their ship for the journey across the stars. Now that they had arrived, there was no turning back. The humans were here, and the galaxy would never be the same. Captain Torin, the commanding officer aboard the Reclaimer, stood in front of the ship's command center, staring out into the void of space. He didn't feel fear. He didn't feel doubt. He felt only the weight of responsibility. "We've come for a reason," he muttered to himself, "and they'll learn what that reason is soon enough." His first officer, a human named Lieutenant Kira, approached him. "Captain, the fleet commanders are asking for clarification. They don't know how to proceed." Torin nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Let them prepare. Tell them to stand by. We will make our move when the time is right." Kira hesitated before speaking again. "And if they attack?" Torin's lips curled into a small smile, though it wasn't one of humor. "Then we show them what happens when you challenge humanity." The sector was still, but underneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Alien ships hovered around their stations, their crews stiff with nervous anticipation. The warship Reclaimer still sat in space, its presence looming like a shadow. General Kalmar's orders were clear: prepare for battle. But no one knew when, or if, the humans would strike. The communications officers worked tirelessly, sending and receiving transmissions, trying to gather any scrap of information that could help them understand the humans' next move. But the Reclaimer remained silent. It wasn't just the fact that the ship was a war vessel that had everyone on edge. It was the way it moved, or rather, how it didn't move. It stayed in one place, still as a rock, giving no indication of its intentions. On the bridge of the Reclaimer, Captain Torin watched the galactic map. He knew that the eyes of the galaxy were upon them. The ships in the sector were waiting for something, anything, that would give them a sign. He could feel the weight of their expectations. The humans hadn't come to this sector to simply observe. They had a purpose, and soon, the galaxy would know it. Lieutenant Kira stood beside him, her voice soft but firm. "Captain, the fleet has finished positioning. They're all in place, ready for any movement, but they're still waiting for you to make the first move." Torin glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "They'll wait a little longer," he said, his tone cold. "But I want them to understand, when we move, it will be fast. The galaxy won't be able to react in time." The comms officer, standing at a console nearby, suddenly spoke up. "Captain, we're receiving a message from the sector's central command. They've requested an immediate meeting. They want to discuss terms." Torin's eyes narrowed. "Terms? There are no terms. There's only what we need." He turned to Kira, who gave a brief nod. "Prepare for a response. Let them know we are not here to negotiate. We've already made our decision." Meanwhile, on the alien fleet's flagship, General Kalmar paced nervously. His mind raced through every possible scenario. The silence from the Reclaimer was both comforting and terrifying. It suggested that the humans were waiting for something. But what? "Sir, we've confirmed that the humans are still in position," Lieutenant Vera said, her voice shaky. "There's no movement, no sign of attack." Kalmar stopped pacing and looked at her, his face hard. "Then they're waiting for us to act. They want to see how far we're willing to go. They want to test our resolve." He slammed his fist down on the console, We cannot show weakness. We must make a stand. Contact all ships in the sector. Prepare for battle." As the officers scrambled to follow his orders, the uncertainty of the situation weighed heavily on their shoulders. What if the Reclaimer didn't just show force? It destroyed everything in its path. They had heard stories about humanity's ferocity in battle, stories that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened warriors. But was it true? Could they really risk everything on a chance? Far away, on the Reclaimer, the crew moved with quiet efficiency. Torin watched the screens, his mind sharp. He knew that the next few moments would determine the course of history. One misstep, one wrong decision, and the galaxy could be plunged into chaos. The Reclaimer wasn't just a warship, it was a symbol, and the humans were ready to make their presence known. The calm was shattered when the comms officer spoke again. "Captain, we're receiving a direct communication from the Central Command. They're demanding we state our intentions. If we don't respond, they'll interpret it as an act of war." Torin didn't hesitate. "Reply with this. We are here to claim what is ours. Stand aside, or face the consequences." The comms officer quickly transmitted the message, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the response came, filled with anger and fear. "You think you can just take what belongs to us? We won't back down. The sector is protected by the United Fleets. You will not win." Torin smirked. "They're scared. They don't understand that we're not asking for permission. We're taking control." Lieutenant Kara spoke up, her voice steady. "Captain, we've completed all preparations. The fleet is standing by. We can engage at any moment." Torin nodded, turning his attention to the view screen. The distant stars seemed to shimmer, like the calm before a storm. But Torin was ready. He had waited for this moment his entire life, and he would not let it slip away. "We will make our move now," he said quietly. "Prepare the ship. It's time to show them that humanity is not to be underestimated." As the order was given, the Reclaimer slowly shifted into position. Its engines powered up, and the hum of energy filled the air. The ship was ready. The crew was ready. The galaxy was about to feel the full force of humanity's power. Across the sector, alien fleets waited, unsure of what would happen next. Tensions were high. Some ships readied their weapons, while others hesitated, caught between fear and uncertainty. They had no idea what they were about to face. But one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same. The sector was holding its breath. All across the galaxy, ships were preparing. The warning had been sent. The human warship was ready to fight, and the fleet of alien ships could do nothing but wait for the first strike. On the Reclaimer, Captain Torin stood at the front of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes focused on the vast black space outside. It felt like an eternity as the final preparations were made. He knew the next moments would change everything. Every ship in the galaxy was watching, waiting to see if humanity had what it took to make their mark. Beside him, Lieutenant Kara scanned the ship's systems. "Captain, all weapons systems are fully charged. Shields are at maximum. We're ready to engage at your command." Torin's lips tightened into a thin line. He didn't want to rush. The Reclaimer had power, but he knew power alone wasn't enough. He needed to send a message. This wasn't just a fight. This was the moment when humanity would prove its strength. The galaxy would know that humans were not weak. A message from the alien fleet commander flickered on the screen in front of them. "Human warship, you are surrounded by the united fleets of this sector. Surrender now, or face the full force of our combined might. There will be no mercy." Torin read the message without emotion, then turned to Kira. "Let's make sure they remember this moment." He gave the command, and the Reclaimer slowly powered up its engines. The ship's movement was smooth but deliberate. The hum of the engines was low, like a growl in the silence of space. Slowly, it turned toward the alien fleet. The tension in the air was thick, every eye on the ship, watching its every move. Across the sector, the alien fleets were in full alert. They had seen the Reclaimer move, but they didn't know what it was going to do next. Some ships began to form defensive positions, their weapons locked and ready. Their commanders were nervously watching, waiting for the first move. General Kalmar of the alien fleet stared at the screen, his fists clenched. The humans were just sitting there, doing nothing, giving them no reason to strike. It made the general feel uneasy. It wasn't normal for an enemy to just wait like this. "Have they made any movement?" Kalmar asked, his voice tight. "Nothing yet, sir," the communications officer replied. "They're just sitting there, as if they're waiting for something." Kalmar turned away from the screen and slammed his fist into the table. "We can't wait forever. If they're not going to act, we will. Prepare for all-out engagement." At that moment, the reclaimer suddenly moved faster. It wasn't a wild charge, but a sudden, sharp acceleration that sent a ripple of panic through the alien fleet. The reclaimer was coming closer, much closer. Every alien ship in its path could feel the gravity of the situation. The human warship was now moving toward them at a steady pace, and no one knew what would happen next. Inside the reclaimer, the crew felt the power surging through the ship. They knew their orders. They knew the mission. And they knew the galaxy had never seen anything like them before. "All systems ready for engagement," Lieutenant Kara said, her voice steady despite the tension. "Weapons locked, shields up. We're ready for whatever comes." Torin took one last breath, then gave the command. "Begin the assault." The first blast came from the reclaimer, a beam of energy that tore through the dark space, hitting the nearest alien ship with devastating force. The explosion lit up the blackness, a flash of brilliant light in the cold void of space. The alien fleets reacted immediately. Ships began firing at the reclaimer, their weapons lighting up the sky. But the human ship was faster, more agile. It dodged and weaved, moving through the fire with terrifying precision. Every shot from the enemy fleet missed, and every shot from the reclaimer found its mark. Explosions rocked the alien ships. They were caught off guard by the strength and skill of the human warship. The reclaimer wasn't just a ship, it was a force of nature. The alien fleets could feel it. They weren't just up against another ship. They were up against a new kind of enemy, one that refused to back down. General Kalmar watched in horror as his fleet began to lose ships. His mind raced. The humans were too powerful, too determined. He couldn't understand it. He had expected a fight, but not like this. Not this overwhelming force. "All ships, retreat." Kalmar shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Fall back. Regroup." But it was too late. The humans had already made their move. The reclaimer was unstoppable. It was clear now. This was no ordinary warship. It was a symbol of humanity's power, and it was carving a path through the alien fleets like a blade through paper. As the crew of the reclaimer returned to their ship after the meeting with the Zorath leaders, the atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. The captain, Torin, could feel the weight of the galaxy's gaze upon them. They had made their intentions clear, but what would the Zorath's response be? Would they be allies or enemies? The silence of the ship was almost oppressive, as if the reclaimer itself held its breath. Torin walked through the corridors, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He had been in countless battles, faced insurmountable odds, and yet this was different. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. He wasn't just thinking about the reclaimer or even Earth. He was thinking about the future of every human in the galaxy. The stakes were higher than ever. His first officer, Kira, joined him as he entered the command center. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of concern. "We've intercepted some communications from Zorath Fleet Command. They're discussing our actions, specifically our attack on the Tikal fleet." Torin looked at her sharply. "What are they saying?" "It's not exactly clear," Kira said, tapping a few keys on her console. "But there are mentions of unpredictable variables and increased security. They're definitely taking us seriously. and some factions within their ranks are pushing for more direct action. Torin let out a slow breath, his mind racing. It was to be expected. The Zorath didn't make idle threats, but the fact that their leadership was divided was both a risk and an opportunity. The last thing humanity needed was to find themselves on the wrong side of an all-out war with the Zorath, but they couldn't back down now. "We'll keep monitoring their movements," Torin said, "but we need to be ready for anything. We'll stay on high alert. If they make a move, we need to be prepared to respond in kind." "We should also consider strengthening our defenses," Captain Kira added. "If we're to survive in this galaxy, we need more than just the Reclaimers' firepower. We need alliances, or at the very least, a show of strength to deter other factions from making a move against us." Torin nodded. "You're right. Let's start making contact with other factions. We'll need to build a network of allies, or at least neutral parties who won't turn their back on us." Just as Torin was about to issue more orders, the communication system chimed again. This time, it was an encrypted message from an unknown source. Torin's brow furrowed as he read the message, which was brief but chilling. "We know you're watching, Captain. We suggest you act swiftly before things spiral out of control." The message was signed by a mysterious name, but Torin knew it was a warning. Someone, or something, was watching them. The unknown threat that had sent the message was clear. Humanity had stirred something in the galaxy, and the consequences were beginning to unfold. "This is getting out of hand," Kira muttered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "If they're already sending threats, it's only a matter of time before someone makes a move." "We have to act fast," Torin replied. "Get me a list of all potential allies in the sector. We need to meet with them, make our intentions clear, and form alliances. The last thing we want is to be surrounded by enemies." Meanwhile, the tension within the ship continued to grow. The crew knew that their next move could be their most critical yet. With the Zorath still on edge and the mysterious message hanging over them, the uncertainty of what came next weighed heavily on everyone. The Reclaimer prepared for its next course of action. Torin knew the galaxy was far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. Humanity had made its mark, but now they had to decide how they would navigate the future. The challenge of survival had taken on a new face. The crew had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but they had to be ready for something much worse. The stakes had never been higher. Would humanity rise to the occasion, or would they be crushed beneath the weight of the galaxy's power struggles? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: the Reclaimer was not going to back down, and neither was humanity. They had fought too hard to be ignored, and no matter what happened, they would make their mark on the galaxy. The crew of the Reclaimer had settled into their new routine, still feeling the weight of the victory they had achieved. The tension in the ship was palpable. They had come so far, but the next steps seemed even more daunting. There were whispers throughout the ship, mostly among the lower-ranked crew members, about what the future would hold. But Captain Torin had always been calm in the face of uncertainty. His mind never stopped, and even though his exterior remained composed, the truth was, the unknown future of humanity in this vast, dangerous galaxy was a heavy burden to bear. Torin stood in his command center, staring at the star systems in front of him. The Reclaimer was continuing its journey toward the core of the galaxy, where they would either face further resistance or find new alliances. It was clear that the galaxy was not a place of peace. The galaxy's leaders had made their fear of humanity known, but Torin understood this fear. It was natural. What had happened in just a few short days was something no one had ever predicted, and now the galaxy would have to adjust to humanity's newfound power. "Captain, we've received a message from the Zorath species." Kira's voice broke through his thoughts. She had been his right hand for years, and there was always an air of quiet authority in the way she spoke. "They're requesting a meeting with us. They want to discuss the aftermath of our victory and the consequences of it." Torin sighed, rubbing his forehead as he looked at the holographic display of the galaxy. "We're not here to negotiate," he muttered to himself. But Kara was right. The Zoroth were one of the oldest and most influential species in the galaxy. If they wanted to meet, they would have to comply. But Torin had learned early on that in the world of galactic politics, diplomacy was just another battlefield. "Set up the meeting," Torin ordered, straightening up. "Tell them we'll be ready in 2 hours." As the meeting time drew nearer, Torin gathered his senior officers. It was important to be prepared for anything. The Zoroth were known for their formal nature, but no one could predict how they would react after the Reclaimers' victory. Kira, who was always one to keep her emotions in check, had a rare nervous edge to her voice when she spoke. "They're not going to like this," she said. "Our presence in their space, the way we fought, it's too much for them. They don't like to be challenged." Torin could sense the underlying fear in her words. It wasn't just the Reclaimer they feared. It was what the Reclaimer represented. Humanity had made its mark, and it was no longer a small, insignificant species to be ignored. But Torin had no illusions about the way the galaxy worked. They had to be cautious, diplomatic, but firm. Humanity had to stand its ground, but if they did so too forcefully, the galaxy could turn on them. The meeting room was prepared. Torin, Kira, and the rest of the senior officers took their seats, facing the holographic representation of the Zoroth delegation. The species appeared before them, their tall, regal forms hovering in the air, with their cold, calculating eyes staring down at the humans. The leader of the Zoroth, a figure known for his wisdom, spoke first. "Captain Torin," the Zoroth leader began, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "We have seen the power of your warship. We understand the implications of your actions. But we have also come to an understanding. You have shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of. But you are still an unknown quantity. We wish to know more. We wish to understand what your people want." Torin met the Zoroth's gaze, unwavering. "We want peace," he said, his voice steady. "But peace must be earned. And if that means showing the galaxy what humanity can do, then that is what we'll do. We've already paid the price for our survival, and we'll continue to do so. But we won't be silenced." The Zoroth leader nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "You speak of peace, but your actions speak of war," he countered. "You have no place in this galaxy without allies. And right now, you have none. You stand alone." "Then we will find our allies," Torin said. "And we will make sure the galaxy understands that humanity is not to be underestimated. You can either stand with us, or you can fall against us. Your choice." The silence that followed was thick. The Zoroth delegation exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. For the first time since their arrival, the Reclaimers' crew felt as though they were not in control. There were still factions in the galaxy who believed humanity was a threat, an unpredictable, dangerous force that could disrupt the order they had worked so hard to maintain. "We will take your words into consideration," the Zoroth leader finally said, his voice cold and unreadable. "But know this, we are watching you, and the rest of the galaxy is as well." The transmission ended, leaving Torin to consider the consequences of his words. The meeting had gone as expected. There had been no real resolution, but humanity had made its stance clear. The Zoroth would not be easily swayed, but humanity wasn't backing down either. It was now a matter of time before the rest of the galaxy took its turn in this unfolding drama. Would they accept humanity's growing power, or would they turn it into a war? Torin turned to Kira, his mind racing. "Prepare the ship," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to need to make our presence felt. The galaxy isn't going to wait for us to make our move. We'll have to make it for them." The Reclaimer had already changed the game, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Torin knew that the next steps would define humanity's place in the galaxy, whether they would be conquerors or allies, and the galaxy was watching. The Reclaimer had been in hyperspace for several days now, its crew restless as they made their way to the next unknown destination. The hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the ship, a constant reminder of the weight they all carried. No one had expected to be here. Humanity's first warship in deep space, traversing through regions filled with powerful and ancient species. The victory over the alien fleet had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, but it also left them in a precarious position. Humanity had revealed its strength, but in doing so, they had made themselves a target. As the captain, Torin was well aware of the stakes, and he knew that every decision he made from here on out would shape humanity's future in this vast, unpredictable galaxy. The crew gathered in the war room, where Torin sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his most trusted officers. He addressed them, his voice steady yet filled with a sense of urgency. "We've gained their attention, and now we need to use it wisely. We can't afford to rush into another fight until we understand our place in this galaxy." Kira, his tactical officer, nodded. "But Captain, we can't just sit back and wait. We need allies, and right now, we don't have any." Torin ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "We'll make allies where we can, but we won't beg for them. We have something they need, power, and they won't be able to ignore that." His words resonated with the crew, but they all knew that the reality of the situation was far more complex than Torin let on. Humanity was a small player in a galaxy dominated by ancient species with their own agendas. The Reclaimers' presence in the sector had made a splash, but it could just as easily make them a target. The silence in the room was broken by the soft chime of the communication system. Torin stood up, his gaze sharp as he turned to the screen. The message came through, and Torin's eyes narrowed when he saw who it was. The Zorath. The Zorath were one of the oldest and most influential species in the galaxy, known for their stoic demeanor and their ability to broker powerful alliances. They had been watching humanity's rise with interest, but no one could say for certain whether their intentions were benign or whether they viewed humanity as a threat. The message was brief, but the implications were clear. They wanted to meet. Torin's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. The Zorath were not an easy species to deal with, and their leaders were not known for their mercy. They would come with their own conditions, their own terms. If humanity wanted to move forward, they needed to understand what the Zorath wanted. "Prepare the ship," Torin ordered, turning to Kira. "We're meeting them face to face." The crew quickly began preparations for the meeting, and within hours, the Reclaimer was on course for the Zorath's homeworld. As they entered Zorath space, the feeling of tension on board was almost unbearable. This was uncharted territory for humanity. The Zorath weren't like the aliens they had faced before. They were patient, methodical, and incredibly strategic. It was hard to predict what they would do next. Torin knew that this meeting could make or break humanity's standing in the galaxy. As the Reclaimer docked at the Zorath capital station, the crew was ready for anything. They stepped into a vast, sterile chamber, the walls adorned with symbols that reflected the ancient and storied history of the Zorath. The Zorath leaders entered, tall and imposing, their presence filling the room with a palpable sense of authority. Torin remained calm, but inside, his thoughts raced. The Zorath leader, a regal figure with eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of the universe, addressed him. "Captain Torin," he said, his voice calm but heavy with an unspoken challenge. "You have disrupted the peace in this sector. Humanity's warship has shaken the foundations of the galaxy, and now we must discuss the consequences." Torin met his gaze, unwavering. "We didn't come here to start a war," he replied, his tone measured. "But if the galaxy wants to test us, we'll be ready." The Zorath leader studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You say you're ready, but the question is, Captain, are you willing to pay the price? Every action has consequences, and your people have already proven they are willing to fight. But the Zorath do not bend to threats, and we do not make deals with those we deem unworthy." Torin stood tall, not showing any signs of fear. "We've already paid our price," he said. "Humanity has fought for survival, and now we fight for our place among the stars. We don't need permission to exist, but we're open to partnerships. We don't need allies, but we can forge them if necessary." The room fell into an intense silence, the tension hanging thick in the air. The Zorath leader's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes seemed to narrow ever so slightly. Finally, he spoke, his voice cold. "You have made your intentions clear, Captain. We will see if your people are truly worthy of such ambition." The meeting ended, and Tauren knew that what they had just experienced was only the beginning. The Zorath may have left with their dignity intact, but Tauren understood that humanity's arrival in the galaxy had fundamentally changed the dynamics. The Reclaimer was just one ship, but its presence would echo across the stars. What came next would decide humanity's future, whether they would be treated as equals or as a force to be reckoned with. The crew of the Reclaimer knew their journey was far from over. It was a new chapter for humanity, and the stakes had never been higher. The galaxy was watching, and it was up to them to decide how humanity would be remembered.